Welcome to My Therapist Says, an interactive experience enriching your most important relationships. I'm Dr. Don Welch, your host and moderator. Let's face it, each and every one of us is challenged in at least one or more relationships at work, around home, in marriage, with children, and friendships. We all desire healthy relationships. Why then do some interactions ignite intensely negative emotions while other relationships nurture the more meaningful moments in life? During this next segment, relationship specialists will respond to questions from a live audience while offering practical solutions. It's like having your very own psychotherapist in your living room. I hope you will sit back, relax, and take in these life-changing insights. Please join me as we now connect with a live audience and My Therapist Says. Again, I want to welcome you to My Therapist Says, and Dr. Diana Shorstrom is directly to my left, a very dear friend of my family and of me, and a colleague at Point Loma Nazarene University. She's a beloved professor. In fact, I had one of my students was rushing off to class, and I said, "Where are you headed?" "Well, to Dr. Shorstrom's class." And I said, "Oh, she's known for her small group skill." And he said, "No, she's spectacular." So my student corrected me and went off to your class. That truly happened about 3 days ago. And so glad to have you with us this evening. And Danielle Levy is with us this evening, has been with us before. She is a person that has skill in working with a variety of personalities. She has a knack for being able to very straightforwardly get at some of the issues that are significant to a person. And I know she's very skilled. I happen to be her supervisor, and I'm privileged to be that. And so I know it very, very clearly, her skill in many different ways. So we're grateful you're here with us this evening. So without any further introduction, would you join me in welcoming Dr. Diana Shorstrom, who will present a 15-minute succinct introduction. It's on.
Is this okay? Good evening. I'd like to start by giving a little bit of background on what might be behind having a combative relative in your family. And the first thing I'd like to say is that it's very common and it's very normal, and every family has this kind of conflict. I've been in private practice for about 38 years, as well as being a professor, and I've never known a student or a client or a family that didn't have a combative relative or two or more. And so if you have that in your family, just to know it's a normal condition. It's very common. But most families choose to hide it or avoid it as opposed to really embrace it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, is maybe we can get some ideas of how to embrace conflict. After all, you only have one family. And so I think because of that, we're afraid to fracture that family or to have something go negative in it. And so it's human nature to sidestep and avoid the conflict rather than to move towards it. So it's usually out of fear of rejection that a family refuses or avoids to embrace that conflict. And they'd have not the education or the experience of how to deal with a combative relative. So not knowing how to do it or how to deal with it is why we're here. The other thing I'd like to go over is how the Bible talks about the sins of the fathers being passed down from generation to generation. Well, we have generations of family patterns of avoiding conflict and resolving the pain of the family members, and this goes unaddressed. So lots of times, members of our families actually feel lonely in the family. So let's look at maybe determining some of the causes possibly behind the combative relative. The first might be addiction, and we're not really going to address that tonight. That probably will be in the next seminar, because there's very specific ways of dealing with addiction. The next would be, there's a possibility that the person might have an emotional or physical illness, and that needs specific medication or medical attention. And we will not be addressing that. But you need to kind of determine the background. Could it be an addictive problem? Could it be an emotional or mental illness? The other thing it could be, I put toxic or extreme. And what I mean by that, sometimes you'll have a relative that's been incarcerated a number of times and they have trouble with violence. And that's also something that needs to be addressed, probably with another professional or on the side. Okay, so let's talk about the normal, difficult personality traits in our families of a combative person. I always tell this to my students, and it's important. There's two kinds of people in the world. People that are afraid and know that they're afraid, and then there's people that are afraid and don't know they're afraid. So the point is, we are all afraid. We are all fear-based because of the need to survive, and survival is dependent on being a part of a family unit. In fact, human beings are dependent on the family unit longer than any other animal. So it becomes very tenuous and very scary to confront relatives when combat is going on. It's interesting. People who know they are afraid can admit it, they can own it, they can introspect about it and talk about it. People who don't know they're afraid are insecure, what we call thin-skinned, defensive, manipulative, and often not honest. That doesn't mean they are ill-willed, they are just scared. Now, the problem is, it's a knee-jerk reaction for us to want to avoid this conflict. And because of this, they become isolated and alone. So I'm hoping we can figure out a way not to do that. So what are we afraid of? Mainly, it's our feelings that are difficult. We don't know what to do with the feelings that arise out of dealing with that family relative. Excuse me, some water. We're also afraid of rejection, criticism, judgment. We don't know what to do with our feelings, especially the kind the combative relative can evoke in us. It's very confusing. So let's try to take some of that confusion out of it by maybe identifying there's two types of a difficult relative. The first type I'd like to talk about is the aggressive active type. And the second one I'll be talking about is the passive avoidant type. In both cases, I believe that you must be proactive in dealing with them, not reactive. Proactive means being able to demonstrate tough love by staying grounded and firm and being able to listen and be there for this person. Reactive is when we get scared and we just have a knee-jerk of avoiding or being defensive ourselves. But most often, the aggressive active type, what's going on there for that person, it is actually fear being covered up by anger or negativity. A perfect example is we've all encountered the bully on the playground as children, or we've heard about bullies, and the bully is very often a frightened child or a neglected child that feels insecure and doesn't know what to do and has no way of admitting it because of not having the support he needs. So instead, he comes out as the bully on the playground as a way to get negative attention. So, in dealing with this personality type, it's always important to give the message, I'm okay, you're okay. Because if you give a message of I'm okay, you're not, or I'm not okay, you're okay, or neither one of us are okay, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to be on an even, firm ground, but to be very kind and loving as you're doing it. Be compassionate, warm, use humor if possible. Keep your voice even and strong. Confirm their feelings and keep good eye contact. And again, stay grounded and calm. And then finally, try to acknowledge and address the underlying fear inside of that bully if possible. You may not know what it is, but if you do, it would be really nice to confirm that maybe you see that they're upset or angry or fearful and that you'd like to support their emotion. Because remember, we all have childhood wounds. The combative relative hasn't learned how to deal with it and doesn't feel safe enough. So it's us as loving family members to provide an environment that does feel safe enough. So what not to do? Don't walk on eggshells. Don't avoid them. Try really hard not to criticize or judge them. Don't talk down to them. And don't give advice unless they ask for it. Just try to create a really welcoming, supportive environment where they feel comfortable enough to open up and share who they really are. Okay. Another thing, there's a little formula. If you can think of when you talk to someone like that, if you can give a compliment followed by support of the feeling. For instance, I'll give you a couple examples of sentences that would demonstrate that. Here's one. I really respect you for how you handled that difficult job, but I sure can understand how scary it is to have to find a new employment. Another one might be, I admire how hard you have tried, and it's okay to be angry. I'm here for you. So you're showing some kind of compliment and respect for that person, and then you're supporting the feeling. Okay, let's go on to look at the passive avoidant type. Actually, you may be surprised to know this type is the most difficult. It's the most difficult because they often pout or refuse to talk or communicate. They sometimes like to play victim, and they often are passive-aggressive, which means they show their anger or disappointment or disapproval by avoiding you, so it's really hard to get them to talk to you and to resolve the issues. If you confront them, they often will say nothing's wrong. Offer support, but offer it what I call once and for all support. You can say something like, you can talk to me anytime, but I'm not going to chase you or nag you. So just let me know when you're ready. And then you really need to let go, let God, maybe go into prayer, and let go, because that shows respect for them, but it also shows that you're not going to play the game of trying to hunt them down or get them to talk to you. So don't keep pursuing them, and it's really difficult because when you love someone, you want so badly to resolve that conflict, and if they're not talking to you, it's really a natural thing to want to pursue them and keep asking them, but it only makes the situation worse. It's better to show confidence in them and wait for them to come to you. In recovery, they call that let go, let God, and when you let go, often God does work, and it's much easier. Again, the same way to approach them in a sentence structure is to give a compliment with supportive feelings. For instance, if you were talking to your daughter, something like, you're precious and I love you, let me know if you would like some support. Another sentence might be, I trust you know yourself well and you will talk to me when you are ready. Always be warm and show faith in them. Okay, so what is it that all of us are trying so hard to avoid? Usually it's the pain of a childhood wound and the feelings that go with that, fear of feelings, fear of criticism and rejection, trying to hide how badly we feel. And often the combative relative will carry great shame about something that they don't know what to do with. And often the behaviors to hide this are the ones that are so irritating to the family and often disturbing. They're often very frustrating to us. So because of that, it's a knee-jerk reaction for you to pull away and avoid. But don't. Be proactive and loving. Try to see the wounded child inside of your relative and try to comfort that wounded child inside of the relative. We must learn to do this. We have to learn how to embrace this conflict or the family starts to fracture and people start to leave and intimacy really breaks down and we lose the warmth that all of us so badly want and need in our lives. So, in conclusion, most people, most family members look but don't see the pain in their brother or sister's eyes. And when they see it, many don't know how to keep the person, or how to help the person, nor how to support their feelings. So try to remember that confronting and embracing conflict is love in action. Remember, God loves your family through you and through how you communicate and support their conflicts. So when you confront the conflict and embrace your brother, you are going to give him a gift. You're giving him an opportunity to grow. Sin is failing, being all we can be. We must learn to grow together, or the family will fracture. So that's my introduction to the combative relative.
Thank you. Dr. Diane Shorstrom, would you join me in thanking her? Thank you. You have a deep understanding of this concept of fear, and we do have one question that's come forward at this point. If you do have your questions, just raise your 3x5 card, and one of our hosts will come by. I'd like to talk for just a moment, if we may, about this idea of fear. We know the Bible talks about it a lot, and Danielle, the three of us, for just a moment, talk of this idea, the difference between, say, fear and anxiety. When we look at fear, fear means there's something imminent that's happening, like we might have a bear in this auditorium. It's imminent danger. It's right here in front of us. Anxiety, on the other hand, has a level of anticipatory action in our lives. We're anticipating. That's why the Bible talks about being anxious for nothing, but in everything in prayer and supplication. Let your requests known, and He will guard your heart and mind, because the mind and heart tend to work together. If they separate, that's where we can go into rumination, cycling, and be in trouble. So let me just start with that, if I may. But let's talk about this underlying fear that you expressed, that you believe that most of us live with some level of fear. Could we start there and try to kind of professionally tease out some concepts related to that?
Well, I think it's just really important to know that it's normal and to be able to admit to it and talk about it. And the minute you do that, it's the beginning of personal growth and the beginning of maturity. It seems to be that Satan thrives on fear. And being able to admit it and acknowledge it and have it, it like diffuses it. And so that's what I mean by embracing conflict or moving towards the fear and talking about what we're afraid of and asking for help and having that be something on the table and something that we're not avoiding like a pink elephant.
Okay. Help the men here, because as a little boy, I always worked to get away from fear. Not even to acknowledge it. I did everything the coaches would say, don't fear anything, that'll ruin your game, this kind of a thing. And it's true for females as well. I'm not just saying males. But help us, how do we even begin to get in touch with the idea that we are fearful? How do we do that?
Well, for me, it's just breathing and feeling the feelings in my body and realizing when my hands are cold or my feet are cold, or I'm perspiring or shaking, or that's a legitimate emotion, and that all of our emotions are equal. Fear's not less or worse than love. It's a necessary thing that may motivate us to want to correct a problem and to realize that God has given us emotions for a reason. They're not there just to bother us or give us conflict, but they're there as tools that we use to grow together and to learn intimacy.
So one way is actually our soma, soma meaning the body.
Right.
Being aware if maybe I have a muscle that's tensing, or if my shoulders are going up, I'm tensing a bit, or if I'm becoming a little warmer, if I'm getting a little anxious, my body will increase in its temperature. Is that, my face might be tight, I might
One
be
of the
clenching.
biggest indicators is shallow breathing or shortness of breath or not breathing much at all. That's usually a way the body tries to control fear.
Okay. We begin to shut down biologically then when we're fearful. We shallow breathe. We don't let our diaphragm drop and take in large amounts of oxygen. And
it makes it worse.
And it makes it worse, doesn't it? Okay. So
if you notice someone that's panicking, they will actually just inhale. There's very little exhale.
Yes.
And if you can get somebody that's panicking to do long exhales, they'll calm down and be able to start thinking rationally about solutions to problems. And
so maybe being aware that I'm taking more time to breathe out than I am breathing in.
Right.
The researcher will suggest that if you can acknowledge that you're taking more time to breathe out than you are to inhale. So exhaling takes longer than the inhaling. That will help you to do more of a stronger breathing. Actually, your chest expands when that happens, and you're taking in lots of oxygen. And certain enzymes are released. There's lots of biological components to this.
Right. And you're able to think more clearly and rationally, and maybe at that point then reach out for help or ask for appropriate assistance or...
Is that why someone in my office say he doesn't like what his wife just said and he goes, is that why he does that?
Probably.
Probably, to try to self-regulate without knowing he's doing that maybe? Or
we do that unconsciously as a way to regulate fear.
Okay.
Is that big sigh.
That big sigh?
Is a way to bring us back to feeling grounded and whole and brave.
Another might be if we're, say, giggling at the wrong time, maybe we're a little giddy.
Another expression of fear.
Of fear would be maybe laughing at the wrong time. When I say wrong time, maybe it's not congruent with what's going on, something that's very devastating and we're laughing about it. It might be a way to self-regulate.
Some theorists say even yawning is a way to regulate or reduce fear.
Yes, Danielle.
One thing you had asked was about, especially for men, typically being raised to not feel or express fear. So kind of going back to that for a minute, I feel like it kind of needs to be clarified that I think sometimes it's appropriate to not show fear or to feel it. I've worked with a lot of veterans, and you have to. So there's definitely a time to not act in fear where you can't communicate better or go towards the conflict because you could die or people could get hurt. So I think for me, coming from more of an attachment perspective, I think knowing the difference, to me, when you love someone, which presumably, we kind of naturally love our family until things happen, right? So when we're born, we have an automatic attachment to our family and other people. It's only when something happens that they're broken. So to me, whenever we deal with attachment and love, there's vulnerability. And so there's fear, right? Because you're risking a lot by being open and intimate with these people, and trusting them with our life, our feelings. So I think for a lot of people, men and women, to kind of think about where the fear is coming from. Again, like you were saying, it's healthy to be afraid of a tiger in the wilderness or someone, but it's different when it comes to relationships, friendships, and relationships with your family. And that's a time where you don't want to back away from it. If you're feeling fear, then that's kind of your body and God's way of saying something's going on.
Yes.
Let's think about this.
I think, Diana, you were talking about that, not walking on eggshells. You were actually saying a little bit of what Danielle was suggesting, that there are times with the combative or a difficult relative that we take a position of strength. You didn't use that term necessarily. But can you help us to understand a little bit more of what Danielle and you were saying in this idea of when you're in a fear, maybe prone place with a combative or difficult relative? How do you do what Danielle just suggested not walk on eggshells? And
I would suggest saying, I'm really afraid because I love you so much and I don't want to lose contact with you, and you're scaring me right now by you're yelling and you're in my face and I feel frightened, but I love you so much and I want to keep our relationship in good shape, so I'm going to stand my ground and really try to support you and understand you.
That's a difficult thing to do, isn't it? To actually state your core feeling, what you're experiencing. Like, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. I'm feeling afraid with this. And that's this position, I think you were saying, Danielle, that's a strong position, but nonetheless, you're making yourself vulnerable. And when we're a little bit transparent and vulnerable, it actually softens the other person, sometimes significantly. Is that what you're saying?
It also causes them to trust you and respect you because you're speaking the truth and you're not trying to manipulate them.
Because if they're fear-driven, they probably feel like someone may be trying to manipulate them. That may be a previous experience.
Very often it is.
That's very helpful as we start these questions. I just wanted to get a little baseline further. This particular question is, in dealing with the combative person at work on a daily basis, what techniques can I do to reduce daily tension and stress? So, and how can I protect myself from their anger? You talked some about this. Let me repeat the question that's being asked. In dealing with the combative person at work on a daily basis, what techniques can I do to reduce daily tension and stress? And how can I protect myself from their anger. That's the difficult thing. It's like, whoa, I want to step back, or I want to run from this person.
So one thing I was going to say, coworkers are a little bit different than relatives, so I'll just start with that.
Okay, yes.
But I think the most important thing, because we've all had to deal with coworkers that maybe are not always the kindest, or maybe they have a bad mood and we kind of get the brunt of it. I think the most important thing is maintaining proper boundaries and not being tied to, not having your emotions tied to their responses or reactions. Meaning, if you have a coworker that comes in and is really critical or angry, let's say, one, not personalizing it. So I think that's a huge piece, is owning your own feelings and letting them own their own feelings.
How do you do that? Because that's a really good statement, really helpful. How do you help them? How do you own your own and help them to own their own? And within boundaries, you're using the word boundaries. How do you do that?
So I think one example would be, let's say you have a coworker that comes in and just seems really angry and maybe critical of you. It would be really easy to take that personally and think, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not a good person, or I really did do something annoying, maybe they're right about me, and kind of go into this self-esteem spiral, which can ruin your mood, make you not as confident, and probably not as good at your job. So to depersonalize it would be to think in your mind, they're coming from a darker place. I don't know what's going on with them, but this is about them, not me.
So that's important, to be able to say that to yourself. This is more of their issue, perhaps, unless I've done something that I need to change or correct. But
right, assuming that you haven't done something you need to apologize for.
Yes.
Really not being attached to their mood. And it's incredibly powerful to stay in that neutral position. And I almost picture this idea of allowing what they're saying to kind of bounce off of us. And I would even think about it visually. When someone's coming at you, just kind of let it bounce off and not take it in. Because, again, if they're speaking the truth to us, we can absorb that. But when we're dealing with a combative coworker, normally what they're saying to us is not truthful.
Nicely said. Were you going to add something?
I was just going to say that's exactly right on. And then if it became a chronic problem and that did not correct it, I think I would do something like say, I really want to keep a good working relationship with you, and could we possibly get a third person to talk through what might be going on here, and so we can really resolve this issue, because I really care about you and I care about this business, and hopefully we can understand one another, and then maybe go to HR or get a third person to help you do that, rather than just keep avoiding.
Yeah, even though HR does that, isn't that true biblically? We try to reconcile it, or we try to work through it. Oftentimes we're not able, so we bring someone with us to be very respectful and try to be of help. Okay. This next question, I wanted to move to that one first because so many of us deal with difficult relationships in the work world, and it's interesting, I think we'll see how similar our behaviors can be toward that person as we would be toward a relative or a sibling. This one is the teen is angry. Here's the question. The teen is angry and discusses some despair and fears over and over again. The same despair, The teen is angry and discusses same despair and fears over and over again. Uses the threat of killing self to force repetitive discussions. So the question is, how do you help this teen? What do you do? What might be your response? Because you were saying we don't want to be reactive, because that will not be helpful, but we want to be responsive. So the teen is angry and discusses the same despair and fears over and over again, and then uses the threat of killing him or herself, to force repetitive discussion. So it's kind of bullying the discussion here, it sounds like. Is that what you're hearing?
Almost trying to get negative attention.
It could be, but
the key here is attention. And I would really, if that was my child, I would really offer to hold them and comfort them and stroke them and acknowledge the fear and say, I'm here for you no matter what. I may not understand or have the right answer for you, but you can be rest assured that I really love you, I'm committed to you, and I'm going to be here for you.
So how do we do that? Say that, and that's a wonderful, and this this is your expertise in the somatic medicine and all that happens to us bodily. And Danielle, I know you have expertise in this as well. Well, what do we do with a teen that's already combative? And how do I say, would you mind come over here? I'll give you a hug, and the person's like, no way, not in your lifetime, buddy. Or that, the reaction could be very combative. So what would you do to start and help this?
I would start with saying, I can see that you're angry and really agitated, and it's really, really okay to be angry. Can I help you with your anger?
So you acknowledge the anger, you state what you're seeing, and you're doing it in love. Because you said that earlier very carefully. I heard you say, whatever we're doing it in love. So if I'm upset or angry, I'm fear-driven, that will cause more reactivity by the teen.
Exactly. And I would make suggestions and say, we could go purchase a punching bag. And I'll hold the punching bag while you hit it. I've actually done that with my teenage clients.
You want to stay behind the bag, though.
Right,
You want to make sure you don't get in front.
Not in front of it.
In case your face shows up. But yes, okay.
Or, you can lay down on your bed and kick as hard as you want, and I'll be there for you. I'll sit there. I'll listen. But really confirm the negativity, the anger, the agitation as being okay. Because right away, usually we try to stop it and divert it or take it personal. Yeah. And that's when it turns into a chronic problem.
You gave some advice one day, and you talked about even a teenager, let's say, laying on the bed, and you might have your hand on the shoulder of the person. I actually did this with our children when they were younger. They would be very upset and angry. I took your advice on this. And what happens when that takes place?
Well, first of all, the safe way to do it is just have them lay on their stomach on the bed, and you can sit or stand next to them with your hand on their back and have them turn their head away from you, and then just say, hey, have at it. I'm going to support you. You can get as angry as you want, but just have them kick up and down using their legs, not their upper body, and you'll hardly ever get into trouble, because what will happen is the anger will drain down the body, out the legs, and out the feet, and it'll be resolved at that point because it's going out of the body with your support and love. And you'd be surprised how many conflicts you can get through very quickly doing it that way.
Yes, thank you. Danielle.
So I think my approach would be a little bit more behavioral
for
something like this.
Absolutely.
And it probably seems really obvious, but the first thing that struck me with that question is just a safety issue. I don't know the person's history, but whenever someone discusses or brings up suicide, to me, that's a huge red flag. And again, even if it's teenager, I think most teenagers are pretty difficult to deal with sometimes and very emotional. So I think that's fairly typical, but discussing suicide is not. So to me, much like you would someone that has borderline personality or other difficulties expressing their emotions or containing it or regulating, I would say the first thing I would do is if someone threatens that, to kind of say, okay, well then I think we need to maybe consider going to the hospital or doing something, because you want to show them that you're taking it really seriously. Because one, a lot of times when people are making threats, especially teenagers, about that, they're not actually wanting to kill themselves. They want, like you said, attention, and they also want their pain to be heard. So again, I think the first thing is to say, okay, if we talk about suicide, that's really serious, and we're going to go do something about it right now to keep you safe. And then once at that point, they normally say, fine, I don't want to kill myself, but I'm so upset, and you're not hearing me, and I'm sad all the time. One of the things that I normally discuss with my teenagers and with their parents is to tell them, I want so badly to hear you, and I know things aren't fair, and I'm kind of have more power, but when you show me so much anger, it's really hard for me to hear you. And I promise I'll sit here and listen if we can just take this down a little bit. And sometimes even talking to a teenager with that level of respect and acknowledging the power differential between the two can be really helpful, meaning that the parent normally has a lot more power than the teenager, which is partially why they're fighting it.
Yes.
So just acknowledging it and giving them a little bit more power without buying into the self-harm behaviors.
So a way for them to even have power is that they can regulate how much anger they express. And so acknowledging you're experiencing that with them, and then inviting them to have the choice how they manage that.
Yeah, because you're basically rewarding them for when they're able to regulate their emotion and calm down and speak more normally and slow down. You're rewarding them by hearing them and speaking to them at an equal power level, which is really what they want to begin with.
And one of the things, because we care so deeply about our children, those of you who are working through some issues with children, we care so deeply that we go to a passionate level, which means that we're not necessarily regulating as well, because we become very passionate. We don't want them to go down this certain road, or we don't want them to think this thought that could be very devastating to them. So talk to us for just a moment, in this case, how we as parents or grandparents or influencing children, how do we self-regulate? Like you were talking about helping the teen self-regulate. In other words, to lower their blood pressure a bit, to actually deep breathe like you were suggesting. How do we do that in the midst of a potentially confrontive experience?
Well, you have to give them an opportunity to discharge that feeling in a healthy way.
Okay.
Because you just can't say, lower your voice and cap it. Now let's talk rationally about this. That's my experience for most teenagers.
Yes, and that's what we tend to do, don't we, as parents? I mean, at least I've done that on many occasions.
We tend to make that mistake.
Yeah, make that mistake,
yeah.
Yes.
So to acknowledge their feeling and give them an opportunity to find a way to discharge it in a safe way. And I'd like to say that often suicide is anger turned inward, you know, and it becomes self-loathing and self-hatred and whatever.
Yes.
But once the disappointment and the fear and the anger can be resolved in a physical way, they're much more rational.
Very good, very good. There is a question here that ties into, this was a text question in to us here this evening. Every one of my siblings and my mother can be combative and hostile. I choose to honor my mother and embrace the loving parts I've decided to focus on. And here's part of the question, if I can get to it. They went on to say, I've decided to focus on our children and grandchildren. I don't really want to invest in relationships with people, even if they're family, who are so hurtful and destructive. Is that unchristian? So if I'm hearing this question, it's a lengthy question here that's very concise, even though it's lengthy. Is they're all combative, and I choose to honor my mother and embrace the loving parts of her, and I've decided to focus on our children and grandchildren. I don't really want to invest in relationship with people, even if they're family, who are so hurtful. Is that unchristian? So it sounds, if I'm hearing this correctly, that the person is suggesting they're disconnecting. Is that correct? And the question is that unchristian? Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, again, I think you have to determine, is it an addiction problem in the family that's causing this combative hostility? And then if so, that needs to be addressed either by intervention or with a specific counseling for addiction.
Yes.
Or is it a mental or emotional illness that has to be outruled? And then if it's not, it's before you disconnect, I think it's really important to say, is have a family meeting and tell them your feelings. And saying, I feel like disconnecting because I've tried over and over to connect with you and to resolve these issues, and it doesn't seem to happen. And I would suggest family counseling or suggest moving forward and talking to a minister or whatever. And then if they refuse to make changes, I don't think it would be unchristian to disassociate yourself from that.
So a starting point would be, if we can have family meetings where we carefully express what our core experiences are, and that the other people in the family respect those feelings and experiences. That's why family meetings tend to be very important. Yes.
One thing, I totally agree with everything you're saying, and one thing I would just add is that oftentimes it's really difficult to get the whole family in, or to get that many people that are that passionate or strong-willed or outspoken to all agree. So one thing I would kind of try that I've noticed, and certainly my own family, is we tend to align with one or more person in our family. And there's also people in our family that I would consider kind of power players. Their opinion holds a lot of weight. And oftentimes, even if you can get one other person in the family to hear you or be on your side, then they can help convince someone else or be an influence. So one of the first things I would do is kind of ask, who in your family do you feel closest to? Or who can you at least have a conversation with? Or if they can't agree to that even, I don't have any, who have you been through the most with? And you can kind of go into a shared experience maybe of loss or connection. So even if they're maybe not agreeing now, if maybe they got along when they were kids or they had this special moment of, when grandma or grandfather passed away, remember how we comforted each other. Mm-hmm. So I would say kind of find one person in the family, hopefully, that you can perhaps work with. And then at least you have another person in the experience with you. And then maybe you can get to family counseling or something like that. And I think ruling out, to me, when I hear about someone that wants to cut off a member of their family, normally to me there is more of potential for addiction or mental illness, to be honest. But again, getting kind of rid of that, I would say that's what I would do, is kind of find someone else that you can relate to or align with in the family. And then I think sometimes going back to, is that a Christian thing, is you have to think about what honoring means. And sometimes showing love and honoring someone is not being in relationship with them, because it can be so destructive in what it does to both parties. I don't think that that's the majority of times, but I do think sometimes there's someone so toxic in our life that we show love by saying, I can't do this to either one of us anymore.
I know this is not about forgiveness, and I think that's where we can entrap ourselves, that we're asked to reach out and forgive. That's a biblical component of being a Christian, a very, very paramount part of who we are. What do we do with that then? We have a toxic family member. You're suggesting that it may be unhealthy to engage the person. I'm going a little further than this question asked. And we are the ones to assert forgiveness. We are to reach out. We're called to do that. How do we integrate that with this idea that it may be too toxic and we may not be able to verbally even offer forgiveness if that's needed in a relationship? Could we integrate that concept with what you're suggesting?
For myself, I always like to think of that I forgive the wounded child inside of them.
Yes.
And I really imagine God standing with a basket, and I put the wounded child in the basket and I turn them over to God. And that's that let go, let God concept. Mm-hmm. And they use that a lot in 12-step, because you're not really supposed to invite an alcoholic or drug addict even to Christmas unless they're in recovery. Mm-hmm. And then you turn them over to God, and you let go of trying to change them. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's, as much as I've dealt with addiction, is a Christian good way of dealing with the addict, because if you keep doing that, they're more apt to get in recovery and come back to the family than if you try to just forgive them and keep them in and allow them to be combative during like Christmas time.
Oh, absolutely. Physicians do this all the time. An addictive personality or someone who's addicted to, let's say, alcohol. I've worked with a number of psychiatrists who would say, well, Don, that actually I won't be seeing. I'll need at least 3 weeks of sobriety before I'll see that client. And they'll need to prove themselves before they can go to the physician to get help. This is a concept that you're referring to. Right. That actually I've had patients get better when that's in place with a psychiatrist with whom I'm privileged to work. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm working on a weekly basis, I will not see them if they're inebriated. But I mean, I may not put that strident of discipline needed, like a 3-week period. You have to have sobriety before you come to see me. But that's a similar component, that we set boundaries, that we're talking about that. I know we've moved into addiction. We're not necessarily doing that tonight. Any thoughts about that?
Well, it's like I said before, addiction is a completely separate category with very stringent rules, and we'll be talking about that in a future seminar.
Let me move to another question, and thank you. I was kind of talking. I do that at my university. I start talking, and then I say, what do you all think? And they said, I think you've told us everything you know and more. So why should we respond at all? So, sorry. How do I handle a family member who over-assert Bible doctrine? This is the question. How do I handle a family member who over-assert Bible doctrine to judge my decisions on a future spouse and my ability to be a Christian spouse because I've had poor examples? And they also speak out about future sins my spouse may do against me. So I think the question is, when people inappropriately use Bible truths to guilt someone, is that what I'm hearing?
That's what it sounds like.
Sounds like? What do we do with someone like that? So they've got the big Bible and they're thumping me on the head. And
well, that's not a combative relative, but it's a controlling one.
That's a controlling. So when we go back to the aggressive active or passive avoidant, this would be in the aggressive active of which you mentioned. It's in the handout that you described earlier.
I think I would say I see that you're really fearful for me or for our relationship. But I want you to know that I love you no matter who I'm with. I'll be available to you. And so address the underlying, I see a child that's afraid of disconnection. So
back to the child. You're seeing the child and you're having respect that we all have a level of, I truly believe this developmentally, that we are all wounded in a certain place in that fear component. So again, you're verbalizing in a very loving way perhaps the woundings. You're not naming them.
No.
That would be condescending or putting someone down. You're hopefully
reassuring that wounded child.
Reassuring
of the connection and support that you're willing to offer.
That you're wanting to. And this is what you were saying about boundaries as well, Daniel, having a strong position. And you also referred to it, Dr. Sjostrom, right at the beginning of having, and you're saying it in a way that's very, could you just repeat what you just said to me? Do you mind? Not word for word, but that idea that you're in a firm position, say, I'm the combative relative.
I want to confirm you that we have a relationship, no matter who else I marry or I'm involved with. I care about you, and our relationship is firm, and I will always support you and be available to have a good relationship.
So that's a common fear, isn't it? A common fear is that a new relationship within the family or between you and another person, that it's going to discredit the current relationship.
Right.
And so the combativeness could be the sense of a loss, the fear of loss again.
Right. Especially when someone tends to be over-controlling like that, as they're trying to keep you in the loop with them, so to speak, or in the relationship and reassure themselves of that.
Yes. So again, when we think of the life of Jesus, when I think of it, he talked so much about fear and demonstrated how not to be fearful, because he would ask reflective questions. What would you like for me to do for you? What is really happening to you? What do you really need in this situation? And he was getting at some of the fears. And the greatest fear we have is abandonment, right?
Right.
The fear of loss. Rejection. So in this case, the fear could be, potentially with this question, the fear could be that relationship between the two of you is going to either decrease or disintegrate potentially.
Right.
One thing I was going to add, because I think that's so true, is speaking to that. And I think two other things I would add in that scenario is, one, I would really encourage the person to consider what their own values are and spiritual beliefs, and find out if they're in line with each other. So I think knowing what your own brand of Christianity and what your relationship with God is, and standing firm in that. And if you don't feel that it is, getting the knowledge and wisdom and counsel that you need. So I think, let's say you really feel like you know who you are spiritually, you really feel good about your relationship with God, and you disagree with a parent maybe, then I think at that point you can be confident that you are making a decision that you feel you've prayed about, you've thought about, is in line with your understanding of Christ. And then I feel like you can go forward with that with some confidence, even if there is a disagreement. And the second thing I would say, going along with reassurance, is to even say to a parent, I need you to trust that you've instilled in me really amazing values, and a sense of God and a sense of what a partner should be. And I need you to trust me with this. And I know it may not be exactly what you want, but I need you to trust that you raised me right.
So it's a great statement. You're asking for your need. This is the issue that's coming up time and time again in this discussion, this work, is both of you have demonstrated very, very helpfully, you've demonstrated how we ask for a need when we're trying to lower the anxiety or the fear. We actually are our own person. This is where people get into trouble. They go into a symbiotic relationship. They don't know if it's their feelings or someone else's. And then that collides because someone's going to fight to become their own person.
Right.
This particular, were you going to respond to that?
No.
Or? No. This particular question just came to me, ties right into this. It actually takes us a little deeper into this question, and it is its own question. I have an older sibling who talks down to me. Now, no one's ever had that happen, right, with a sibling? Okay, that's the first time I've ever heard that question. But anyway, we'll deal with it since it's the first. But, I have an older sibling who talks down to me and treats me like an unruly child, and rages. And they are 72 and 65. I think you were talking about this. This makes me very angry. Examples are finger wagging, patting me on the head, saying, "Well, you poor thing," etc. Wow, this is really a difficult situation. Am I, and I am an accomplished person. I've tried to talk to her about it, and she gets defensive. Okay, this goes back to what do we do when a person gets defensive? Since I have to be around her, how can I set a boundary? So now you have someone that's patting you on the head. That's what we do to little children, right? And we do that in a gentle way to a little child. Actually, we do that because there's a soft spot in their head when they come into the world, and we want to pat them and say, we're going to be real gentle with you, but it's demeaning to an adult, isn't it? So what are some steps? This has happened to a lot of people. Probably we've all been demeaned in a way. What would be some steps?
See, this is when you need to come forward. And I'd say, gosh, sis, you sure seem stressed out. Is there something I can help you with?
So you're naming what you believe the person's exuding and expressing to you.
And actually offer help, and I would even lean forward and move towards the person, and even maybe touch their shoulder and let them know that you're not going to be intimidated, that you're one-on-one, I'm okay, you're okay. Gosh, you look stressed out. Is there something I can help you with?
Okay. Now, how do we say that? The way you said it to me, I don't feel defensive. Because it really feels real to me. What if the other person goes, you don't have to tell me how do I feel, and they become defensive again? How would you come back?
I just want you to know I think you're precious and I love you, and I just want to be here. If there is something you'd like to talk about, I'm available. And if they continue, then you know that it's an ill-intentioned person that's only out for the struggle and to put you down and to feel good about hurting you, and then it's so toxic that you do need to disengage.
Okay.
And it's a good way to measure what kind of a relationship are you in. If you become vulnerable and real and strong and want to engage several times in a row, and the person continues to behave that way, that's an ill-intentioned person.
Okay. Yeah, this is kind of the scriptural piece when Jesus said, when you go into a city and you're sharing this wonderful gift of salvation, and the people become kind of ill. How did you say that?
Ill-intentioned.
Ill-intentioned. That word. That oftentimes you would say that there might come a point where you have to kind of shake the dust off your feet and leave that particular city.
Or don't throw your pearls before swine.
Yes. Okay.
Two things that I would say, because I am an older sibling, so
yes.
And I think just kind of going with.
Now, you don't pat your sister on the head and be demeaning toward her.
I think my sister would kill me if I pat her.
Okay.
So I can relate to that. But I think one thing that we have to kind of think about is sort of, they call it like a sibling constellation. So kind of where our birth order is says a lot about our role in the family. And this isn't always, but it's, I think, a fair generalization oftentimes. So older siblings tend to be really protective of their younger siblings, even when they become adults and older. It doesn't really change. And so I think there is sometimes protection gone in the wrong direction can become very condescending. So one, if we're not dealing with addiction or other, mental illness, I would say, I would talk to them about, you've always protected me, or you've always looked out for me. That's probably been really hard for you, because I think younger siblings don't realize the burden, responsibility of, it's almost like being a parent in some ways, even in a very healthy dynamic. So addressing that, because the older sibling might not honestly know. And I think the second piece that goes with boundaries is two things. One, assuming the opposite. So when they're being kind of condescending, or you feel that way, to say one of two things. I don't think you're meaning to come off in a condescending way, but I have to tell you I'm experiencing it in that way. Help me out. And a lot of times someone will say, no, I'm not, or I don't know, I'm in a bad mood, or maybe I used the wrong word. So either that, so again, assuming that they're not out to hurt you.
Yes.
And then the second thing would be to create a boundary, which I think is really important. So for you, putting the burden back on ourselves, when we feel our anger level or anxiety getting to, I think probably even at a 4 or 5, and knowing that in yourself to shut it down so you don't get to a level where you're saying really awful things. So for me, personal experience with my sister, I had to do that the other night. I had to say, Nicole, I'm hearing a tone, and it's really hard for me to not respond in a frustrated way.
That's good.
And she was able to say, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just trying to listen to you. And so just stopping it when it doesn't get to that escalation point of just saying, your tone is making it really hard for me to respond to you right now. Or I'm feeling myself getting frustrated. Can we stop for a minute? Is sometimes I think when you're not dealing with, again, one of the kind of rule outs, super important to do. Notice the tone before you get really angry and say it. And a lot of times it won't escalate to that level. So,
but again, you're taking the risk of being really vulnerable and honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as children, we have a voice. We before we can even see, we cry and scream, and hopefully our parents try to figure out what's wrong with us or what we need, right? And then at some point, when we have this level of fear that we're aware of, we begin to shut down, and we no longer have the voice that you're expressing here. The voice, you said, Nicole, is the way this is being expressed. How did you say that again? Could you say that? That was really, really helpful.
Yeah. So, again, I think this just happened last night or the night before, so
Wow.
easy to remember. But I was asking her advice, my little sister, who's not that young anymore, and her tone was starting to feel condescending, much like in this question. And I felt myself reacting, not responding.
Right.
And as a therapist, I'm a little more tuned into when I'm feeling reactive. But it was enough that I started to feel defensive. So I said, Nicole, your tone, is kind of making me feel a little frustrated, or it sounds a little condescending. Can we just slow down for a minute? And I'll say even, I'm kind of wanting to shut down right now. And then again, if you have a somewhat healthy relationship, the other person normally doesn't want you to shut down.
Right.
So immediately she said, oh, I didn't mean it like that. I just... normally it's something silly.
So the important piece, I just think this is so important. The important piece is, do you have a voice? This is a voice that we lose as we can lose, as we develop as human beings. We can lose a voice that says, my experience of you is this, and in a respectful relationship, I think you were describing you and Nicole, that the other person will often, maybe most, if not all the time, say, oh, I didn't mean it that way, because again, Diana, you are saying that that's a level of being transparent or vulnerable. So you were vulnerable to your sister, saying, this is important to me. However, the way that this conversation is going, I'm experiencing this. So I, Danielle, have a voice.
But
correct?
even, let's say you're not there yet. Let's say you're not in a place yet where you've practiced knowing when you get to a 5 or, and you don't trust what you're going to say, which is fair. I think the first thing to protect the relationship to do is to say, I'm getting really angry. I love you. Can I call you back in 10 minutes? Or can we finish this conversation? And oftentimes, if someone is not great at regulating their own emotions, which we all are sometimes, getting off the phone or moving away from the person for a few minutes, but acknowledging that you care about them. I'm not hanging up on you, but can you just give me a few minutes? Is enough time to just kind of settle yourself back down if they really are making you that reactive.
And it's legitimate, too, to say, I'm confused right now and I don't know what to do.
Yes.
And because I care about our relationship or you so much, I need to take a break and get really clear about what I'm feeling.
That's a level of vulnerable. That's
Right.
being vulnerable, which actually the other person would probably say, well, okay, let me be helpful. I'm not trying to hurt our relationship.
Because so often we feel like we need to be right or have the answers before we can verbalize.
Am
an
I the only
opinion.
one that feels that? That's a common feeling, isn't it?
And I think it's also, I do this with my couples also. I have them do the same kind of exercise when they haven't gained all the skills to have those conversations. Is they're allowed to take a time out, but it has to be, I'm getting really upset. I adore you, but really mad. Can we take a 10-minute break or 20 minutes? So the person knows you're not abandoning them. You're not judging them. You're not going anywhere, but it's too much. And so I think whether it be couples, friends, family, it's kind of the same idea.
Yeah, even couples, they will implode over the piece where one doesn't have a voice. So if you're not doing what you're saying, the other person might begin to disrespect you. But the respect would come, oh, you have a voice here and you need this space. Now, the important thing that you suggested, both of you were suggesting that you state when you come back. A lot of times people say, I need a break from this. I don't know when I'm coming back, but I got to stop now. And that can destroy relationship. But if you specify
when you come back,
even if you came back in 10 minutes and say, I'm sorry, I'm still upset. Can we break for another 30 minutes and come back? And the person has to negotiate, to say, yes, that'll be okay.
Well, if not, then you get into the category that she suggested of being passive.
Yes.
So if you don't put parameters around it and you don't re-engage, you become the passive-aggressive person that shuts it down, and that's how you take power in the relationships and the control.
That's right.
So again, to not fall into the passive-aggressive mode, which is equally as destructive, maybe sometimes more, is to really state, I need to disengage, but you have to be the one to re-engage. You can't just walk away and ask them to pursue you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, the next question related to, if you go back on your handout, this person is asking the question, what if your relative is halfway in between the aggressive active and the passive avoidant? This is a very good question. We were kind of going back and forth with that. I thought this question would fit real well there. What if you have a person doing that? This person's asking, what if your relative is halfway in between? Say that aggressive active person, that manipulates through intimidation or bullying behaviors, or the passive avoidant that manipulates potentially by playing victim, or they tend to be passive-aggressive or overly apologetic, according to Dr. Shorstrom here.
Well, in both cases, you need to be proactive.
Okay.
And state your frustration or your feeling, but first give a positive compliment on how much the relationship means to you and that you want to support them and come to some resolution because you really care about the relationship. But confirm the fear that you see in the aggressive part, if you can. And in the passive avoidant, say, I'm not going to nag you or chase you around the house or come after you. I'm just going to say once and for all that I'm available and I'll wait for you to come to me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That idea of giving that other person choice in that relationship, that interaction, but having a solid position. You're saying, I really do care about the relationship. That's difficult to do when we're reactive. When we're reacting to something, we want to say, you do that, I don't like that, or why do you do that? That's kind of dumb. We go to a fear-based reaction instead of a response. The response says, I really care about the relationship. Is there a way we can work on this?
Right.
And that's a vulnerable place. It's counterintuitive for us emotionally to do that. Because our tendency reactively is to do put-downs. Bring them down to what I feel, my level. We need to not do that, however, and that is to make ourselves vulnerable or make ourselves in a way available to them by saying, I really do want this to work out. That's what you were saying, Nicole. You're a sister a moment ago, weren't you?
And I think this combination's the most difficult. Someone that has both, which it can be any of us really, but there are people that have both, and I think it's the most difficult because it's so inconsistent, and we're really good as people of picking up patterns and kind of adapting. So if you have someone that falls into the first category, you can kind of manage that. If they're passive-aggressive, you can kind of manage that. But when they're both, it confuses us and it kind of throws us off because we don't know how they're going to act each time. So one thing I would encourage, because I put a lot more on personal responsibility, I think, is if you're dealing with someone like that, you need to make sure that your self-care is most important. So you need to make sure that you're working on your own reactivity, your own fears, your vulnerabilities, your own, I wouldn't say weaknesses, but areas that maybe you do need to strengthen in your own personality, and taking care of yourself and treating yourself maybe with the care that family member isn't treating you with, and not just expecting that it's going to come from them or putting that on them. So
that's very true. It's like you have to be comfortable with your own fear and your own anger before you can offer support to somebody else for their fear and anger. So it requires nurturing yourself and a lot of self-care to be that kind of a solid person for other people.
So it's doing kind of preparing for it. Sort of like on the airplane with a little child, they'll come by and say, we don't want you to be reactive if the plane goes down and actually the oxygen falls. We want you to be responsive. And your responsive is to take care of yourself first, right? We all know that. And then you can take care of the child. So it's pre-planning. to a degree.
Yeah, and I think with anything in life that is unexpected and out of our control, we have to make sure that we're in the best position to handle it. So I kind of think of it as planning for, an earthquake or an emergency. We have our little kit. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, if it's going to work or it's even going to affect us, but we need to be somewhat prepared, meaning that you're taking good care of yourself, that maybe you're seeing a therapist, that you're healthy, seeing maybe a doctor, that you're getting your spiritual needs met, so that when you are confused by other people and kind of emotionally rocked, it doesn't throw you into a tailspin.
Yes. Very good, very good. Would you join me in thanking Dr. Sjostrom and also Danielle Levy for joining us this evening? Actually providing an amazing discussion. So right on. I want to invite you to our next My Therapist Says. We are holding this every first Tuesday of the month, and so it's Tuesday, March 3rd. You can see this. It should come up on our screen. You'll notice that we have Dr. Julie Hayden. She's actually the Dean of Behavioral Science at a seminary close to us here. Jim Coyle, who is actually a specialist. He's been in the field 40 years with addiction. And then, of course, I'll be the moderator, and that's coming up. It's called Addiction-Free Behavior on Tuesday, March 3rd. So we hope that you will come back for that or let others know if they would like to hear it and tune in and interact by live streaming. That is available as well. I'm going to have a word of prayer, and then we're going to be closing for the evening. Thank you again for coming this evening. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the privilege of insight. All of this discussion and work here tonight has derivatives from the Bible, clearly from your truth that sets us free. When we understand clear ways and helpful ways, productive ways to enjoy relationship, we actually experience life to the full as you have instructed us to in John 10:10b. You've come that we might have life and have it to the full. The fullest life is one who is able to have healthy, enriched relationships. So we pray your blessing upon the work that we have done this evening, that it would be in honor of you, for you've created us each and every one in your image, and we give you praise for that. We are each special. We have this voice that is needing to be heard, and we can more healthily interact with those family members that may be challenging for us because of your presence here this evening. Your presence makes all the difference when two or three have gathered together for your purposes. So we thank you, we honor you, in Jesus' name, amen. I hope that you have a very good evening. Thank you so much again for attending here.